Welcome to The Pilgrim, the podcast for Jesus followers like you who wants tips and advice to grow their faith in the ups and downs of journeying through this world. I am O.O. Living and I'm your host.
Have you ever asked what it means to follow Jesus in your everyday life? Like, how do you follow Jesus in your work life and your family life and those aspects of your day in the ordinariness of life? And this isn't really so much about what we believe, but so much about how our beliefs impact us. What is my life supposed to look like if Jesus is my Lord over every moment of every day? And the first thing I would likely say here is our daily routine or our daily habits speak volume of truth about who we are and who we are truly following. Jesus, the world, or self. So number one, we must examine our daily routine if we must follow Jesus in the everyday life. Let me start with this. What do you do first thing in the morning? Since we are creatures of habit, if the first thing we do in the morning is done consistently over time, that thing reveals who we are truly following. Let's say exercise is part of your daily routine as it is mine. How do you exercise in a way that shows that you follow Jesus? Let's pose the question another way. How do you follow Jesus when you're exercising? To answer this question is to ask another question. What does it mean to follow Jesus? In our days, if Jesus is not physically present with us here, follow him logically would mean living for him and his glory. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So the answer to the question, how do you follow Jesus when you're exercising? Or how do you live for him and his glory through exercising? Is to exercise to show that Christ is more valuable than exercising. How do I do that, you may ask? Well, Jesus told us to love him more than anything else, including our most cherished relationships, giving us the principle we must live by. That is, live and do everything you should do for Christ, so much so that you can give them all up for Christ. If we believe that Jesus is infinitely valuable and treasurable as he is, then it should impact us radically in the way we live in the everyday life. What we want in the daily routine is to be filled with the preciousness of Christ, is to be filled with the preciousness of Jesus. We want something that gives us a zeal for the glory of Christ, for the day's work. We want to be strengthened to face whatever the day may bring. We want something that gives us joyful courage and the resolve to follow Jesus at all cost. That is the real agenda in the everyday, because following Jesus in the everyday means highlighting his value in all we do in the everyday. So while our daily routine is the aspect of our following Jesus in the everyday, it is important that we look at the aspect that actually influence what we do. The mind. What dominates our thoughts, our minds over time, alters the way we live and how we do what we do. We will follow Jesus in the Monday when we think and reflect on Jesus in the Monday. So number two, we must evaluate our daily reflection. In the final conversation between Jesus and Peter in John chapter 21 are three ingredients that are indispensable in evaluating our daily reflection as we commune with Jesus in the everyday. Examination, exclamation, and exaltation. We are going to look at them briefly and then I will close. The first ingredient is examination. Jesus often asked his disciples questions in order to reveal what was in their heart. Devotion are time to talk to God through Jesus and tell him what's on our hearts, but they are also a time to allow him to ask us questions. I believe Peter must have thought Jesus was asking a strange question. But Jesus was posing a fundamental question, even basic to Christianity itself, because the Christian faith is not essentially a set of beliefs about a person, but a loving relationship with a person. In verse 15 of John 21, note the qualifier Jesus added, "Do you love me more than these?" Jesus asks us whether we love him more than anything or anyone else. Do you love me more than earthly pleasures? Do you love me more than the world and success and fame and fortune and life itself? Until this extensive question is considered, our devotional reflection cannot bring in the full presence of Jesus into our everyday lives. Peter was grieved that the Lord continued to ask him if he loved him. Yet recall, Peter is the one who so boldly pronounced that even if all other disciples abandoned him, he would never do so. Peter needed to be probed deeply and pointed, and so do we. We need to be probed deeply and pointedly, because sometimes our devotions can be piercing moments when the Lord deeply convicts us of our failures. The second ingredient that is necessary in our devotional reflection is exclamation. Peter finally appealed to the Lord's knowledge of his heart. God's knowledge of us is not meant to be a threat to us, but a comfort. After all, Jesus knew Peter's failure even before Peter knew he would fail. Moreover, he was dining with Peter after he had thrice denied him. What a comfort that is. What a comfort to know that the Holy God knows we are sinners, but desires fellowship with us nonetheless. That's amazing. Though not brought out in the English versions, the Greek text actually shows that Jesus and Peter used different words for love. The word for love Jesus used the first two times refers to the highest expression of love, that is agape love. In Peter's first two responses, he replied with a much more human response, a love linked more to emotional affections. But when Jesus spoke a third time, Jesus dropped his word and picked up Peter's. That means Jesus meets us where we are and begins to work in our lives to take us where he wants us to be. So the third ingredient necessary in devotional reflection is exaltation. Jesus' instruction in verse 15 to 17 to Peter was simple but profound. He said, "Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, and feed my sheep." Jesus' intention was to let us know that if love is real, it really acts. Love is more than theory and goes beyond abstract propositions. Love demands service, equips you for that service, and produces result from that service. Because God's design for us is to follow and be where Jesus is daily, day in and day out. Each person has daily routines that must be examined. So the question is, are we where God has called us to be? Are we doing what God has called us to do? But even more, without a commitment to evaluate our devotional reflections, that is, our personal communion with Jesus, our calling will remain empty and our hearts unfulfilled. Thank you for listening to today's episode. It's a great encouragement that you took your time to listen to these words. Have you listened to other episodes in the Pilgrim podcast? Check our growing archive. You will see a defined small talks on the Christian life to enrich your walk of faith. Feel free to subscribe or follow the podcast on your listening platform. Have a more fruitful weekend ahead. I remain your host, O.O. Living. See you next week.